seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop, steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side. Off by Diggs. Stay in oh my God! 30, no 10, touchdown! Are you kidding me? Miracle finish! It's a Minneapolis miracle! Oh my God! No way! Ah! What a miracle finish!
And welcome to the State of Purple podcast. Initial reactions. Jack Day, Aj Mansour. The Minnesota Vikings won a game in regulation. They held on to beat the San Diego. I just did it. LA Chargers 27-20 on the road to improve to 4-5. Jack, I know you had your doubts, man.
Yeah, I did. And just listening to our soundtrack going into the show, talking about the miracle, this almost felt like a miracle. I mean, the Vikings winning by 7 points, that just feels so outlandish to me. Just hearing that now, I kind of talked about something when the Vikings won a couple close games back to back, and it felt like that might be the momentum they needed. Maybe they needed to actually win a game by 7+ points and kind of get that feeling underneath their feet, get used to winning that way. I'm still not very optimistic about the future of this season, but it's a good feeling watching them go and win. The defense played well, extremely banged up defense, played well against a guy that's had his name thrown around in the MVP conversation. So overall, it was a great win for the Vikings. I am fairly surprised, but at the end of the day, it was still very entertaining to watch the Vikings come out on top.
Well, we'll spend about 10 minutes to break this thing down with our initial reactions. But a reminder, this is an interactive virtual podcast recording. So for those of you who are on the stream right now, feel free to jump your comments and your thoughts in the chat as well. We'll pull them up and include them in the conversation. Jack, San Diego Chargers, early this season, they looked great. Justin Herbert, like you mentioned, was MVP conversation. Mike Williams was a dynamic wide receiver. He's basically disappeared. And Austin Eckler was a dominant force in the run game. There were pieces of that we saw today, but they didn't look like a quote unquote good team, I wouldn't say today.
No, and the Vikings defense, oddly enough, kind of did look like a good team, which is just, it's bizarre. And this is just listing off the top of my head. I might end up missing someone, but without Patrick Peterson, without Danielle Hunter, without Anthony Barr, without Michael Pearson, without Harrison Smith, this Vikings defense had some younger guys step up. Eric Kendricks, who has been so good for so long, also stepped up. They said something during the broadcast kind of saying that Eric Kendricks is the heartbeat of this defense. That is 100% true. Eric Kendricks, the defense lives and dies by his performance. That's kind of how it feels right now, because when he plays at such a high level, he can do some extraordinary and very special things in coverage and in run support. He had the sack today. Cameron Bynum had his second good game in a row, I'd have to say, subbing in for Harrison Smith. Had a nice pass breakup, I believe, towards the goal line, and then he had his first career sack as well today. So those are kind of the two biggest highlights for me on the defensive side of the ball. Entertaining seeing those guys. It's always fun seeing Eric Kendricks do something. You know he's going to get his guys running down the field. And that hair flip that he had was A+. So that was fantastic. Fun seeing Mike Zimmer and his defense kind of go out there and perform well against an offense that theoretically should have been able to move the ball on them fairly easily.
Jack, I hate to rain on the parade. The game is not yet 15 minutes out from becoming final, but there were still some moments that the Vikings issues reared their ugly heads. We had some questionable clock management to close the end of the first half. The Vikings allowed the Chargers to go down the field and score right before the first half. And then it got to that fourth quarter again, and we just all assumed it was going to go into overtime at the very least, if not end up with the Vikings losing that game. They came through with the clutch fourth down conversion, right?
Yes, I believe so.
They went for it on fourth down. Yes, absolutely. And you have that opportunity there to then assert your will and just grind the clock down to victory. We will continue to talk the rest of the season as this becomes a conversation of whether or not they're going to make the playoffs. Should they make the playoffs? We don't think they're going to go far. We don't think they're going to be a Super Bowl team. But at the same time, they're a game out of the playoffs. Okay, they control their own destiny when they talk about playing the other teams, and they got a lot of games against the NFC North coming up with some winnable opportunities. Starting next week, actually, with a home game against a very good Green Bay Packers team.
Yeah, and it also sounds like they're going to start getting some of those guys that I just mentioned back back. I think Harrison Smith should be ready to play. It sounded like Patrick Peterson. Take this with a grain of salt because it seemed like Michael Pierce was supposed to play the last couple of weeks, and then he gets put on IR yesterday, which is kind of weird. But
something must have happened because we talked about it last week, Jack. The pre-recorded coach's interview that plays right before the game on KFAN, usually recorded Thursday or Friday with PA and Mike Zimmer. Mike Zimmer said he expects to get Michael Pierce back last week. He didn't play last week. He didn't play this week. He's now on IR. So he's out for is that 3 more weeks at the very least? Something must have happened that was a setback in his injury.
Yeah, it must have. But it has been fun kind of seeing some of the younger guys. Armin Watts has filled in admirably for him, if I had to say so myself, and that's been entertaining. But kind of going back to what you said, going into next week, they get back at home after a confidence boosting type win, I would say. And on the offensive side of the ball, it kind of felt early as if Kirk Cousins was kind of out of sync. It just didn't feel right. There was some, I know he's been known for checking down more often than not, but Kirk Cousins can push the ball down the field. He is capable of doing so. And I saw a couple things on Twitter where it kind of looked like he had KJ Osborne open down the field early and he decided to check down instead. That's frustrating. That kind of went out the window in the second half, which has been weird. Normally that the script is kind of flipped. But in the second half, Kirk Cousins went to his go-to target and Justin Jefferson a couple of times. That crucial catch, I think that was at like 3rd and 20 or something. Justin Jefferson was a monster on 3rd and 4th down the day. But that catch, and there was another catch that were just insane. Justin Jefferson had 9 catches for 143 yards on the day. Monster performance. And I think it kind of showed on the broadcast that he knew about all the noise going into this game. We talked about this on Friday's show, that Justin Jefferson, that narrative would have been a lot more fun if the Vikings weren't 3-5 heading into this game. It seemed like Justin Jefferson still had some fun with that narrative. He flipped the ball to Keenan Allen. I thought that was funny. And obviously, I still think there's a little bit of beef with Justin Jefferson not winning that Offensive Rookie of the Year award. And Justin Herbert, who they were playing against, did take that award home. So that was fun kind of seeing him come out on top on this matchup, and not only come out on top, but do it in such dominating fashion.
Yeah, a little bit of a flex for Justin Jefferson. Got the stats pulled up here real quick, Jack. Let's run through some of them. Adam Thielen, 65 yards. You mentioned Justin Jefferson, 9 catches for 143 yards. Both touchdowns today, Jack, went to Tyler Conklin. Passing touchdowns, I should say, went to Tyler Conklin. He only had 3 receptions for 11 yards, but 2 of them were for touchdowns.
Yeah, and that's kind of, it reminds me of Kyle Rudolph. I think Tyler Conklin is a little bit better of a tight end in between the 20s, a little bit more athletic, but he is huge in the red zone. And he made a couple of nice catches in the end zone that helped boost. It was one of those on 4th down as well. I believe one of those were when they went for it on 4th down. And that was the weird one where the 2 Chargers players, Derwin James is one of them, kind of collided, and he ended up catching the ball. But yeah, Justin Jefferson and Dalvin Cook were kind of able to move this offense down the field. And then Tyler Conklin was able to kind of cap some of those drives off with a couple touchdowns on the day.
Dalvin Cook finishes with 24 carries for 94 yards, gets that touchdown in the late stages of the game. The Vikings barely crack over 100 yards rushing, though, so it wasn't a dominating rushing attack, but it came through when they needed it. Good to see Dalvin kind of get back in the mix of things. Obviously, this offense wasn't, I wouldn't say clicking on all cylinders, but they did move the ball. They did do good things, maybe setting the table to take that next step next week against Green Bay.
Yeah, I think it's at this point you have to look at this offense with baby steps. I don't think anyone can really expect Clint Kubiak to come out and coach this team to a 42-3 type style of win. It just doesn't feel like this is the team that's going to necessarily put their foot fully down on the throttle. They haven't done that. They did that a little bit today instead of deciding to go for, I think it was like a 52 or 53-yard field goal to go up 10. Instead, they decided to keep the ball in their offense's hand and not even let the Chargers get a chance to go back on the field. That paid off for the Minnesota Vikings, and I think moving forward, we need to see a little bit more aggression from this coaching staff if they want to continue to win ball games.
Jack, it's easier to make improvements every week when you have a victory, right? The taste in your mouth is a little bit better. People aren't grumbling when they get to the locker room or to train the performance center in Eagan for this week of practice. I'm going to put you on the spot here, and I apologize. We didn't talk about this before we went on. Give me one thing from today's game that you loved, one thing that felt really good carrying into the rest of the season that you wanted to see, and maybe one thing that was a little bit concerning as we continue to see this team not be a perfect team, but have some flaws along the way.
Yeah, I'll start with concerning. I think one of the biggest things of concern is something that actually I just talked about kind of faded away in the end of this game was Kirk Cousins playing scared. I've talked about that all week. It's kind of felt like, and it felt like in the beginning of that game when he had some guys where he could push the ball down the field, he decided to check the ball down instead. And sometimes that is the right thing to do. I'm not saying Kirk Cousins, hey, never check the ball down, but sometimes when you have a guy one-on-one, it just feels like this offense is missing something, and they started to do it more with Justin Jefferson in the second half. But those shots have to start to come more, in my opinion. I think there was a play where I think it was right after D.D. Westbrook's long return. I think he had like a 40-yard. That's a huge momentum shift. And I think they did like some sort of end around the Justin Jefferson that lost like 3 or 4 yards. Take a shot at the end zone there. The momentum is in your favor. You get a punt return down to like the 30, 40-yard line in opposing territory. Let Kirk either throw it out of the back of the end zone or at least give a guy a shot one-on-one out wide. You see what Justin Jefferson is doing. You know what Adam Thielen brings to the table. They're both very good at contested catches. I would like to see a little bit more aggression, not only on like fourth downs going for it, trying to stick the dagger in their opponents, but take the shots when you are allowed to take the shots. You have a first down and 10 after a huge momentum shift. Take those shots. I'd love to see that out of this offense, and that was kind of something that I would have liked to see a little bit more today. A positive for this team is just seeing some of these young guys starting to step up. I mean, I just mentioned Cameron Bynum, Patrick Jones. I talked about briefly, I think, on one of the shows this week. He didn't really make any noise in the pass rushing game, but he seemed effective in run support. I think that was really Patrick Jones, third-round rookie out of Pittsburgh, defensive end. That was really his only meaningful playing time. And I could be wrong on that, but it felt like that was really his only meaningful playing time on the season. Seeing him get out there, seeing Cameron Bynum get his chances, seeing Cameron Dantzler also playing out there, it's good for this team because there are a lot of one-year deals on that defense. Seeing some of those young guys get out on the field, and not only get out on the field, but get out on the field and hold a high-powered offense to 20 points. I think that's the biggest positive takeaway from this game, outside of Justin Jefferson absolutely torching that Chargers secondary.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I'll go a little different than you. Some of the negative, or one negative that I saw, was the 11 penalties or 10 penalties for 118 yards. You're not going to beat good teams if you have that many mistakes and you keep moving the ball backwards. The positive, I'm going to go with Tyler Conklin. And just for the sake of opening up the red zone a little bit, it's not just Dalvin Cook or Adam Thielen anymore in the red zone. You have another option, another target there. He didn't play a great game as far as big numbers. He had the 2 touchdowns, his first 2 touchdown game. But like I mentioned, 3 catches, 11 yards. So he wasn't a giant part of the game plan, minus the impact that he had in the red zone, which I think is going to be key. This team has proven that they can move the ball up and down the field, and they get to the red zone, and sometimes they stall out. So adding another weapon there, another dynamic in that offense that allows you to have Conklin across the middle the way that Kyle Rudolph used to be there, Adam Thielen in the corner, Justin Jefferson in the other corner, and then Dalvin Cook up the middle will only help this team going into the future. Jack, we're going to say goodbye today. We'll take a little time to stew and marinate over this game a little bit. We'll touch base early this week to record another podcast before we turn our attention to the Green Bay Packers and a big divisional game next week against the one of the top teams in the NFC. They won again. It was very ugly from what I could tell against Seattle, but Aaron Rodgers was back. Didn't look great, but he'll be back next week, and they'll be inside, so we don't have to worry about the weather against the Green Bay Packers and Minnesota Vikings. So, Jack, we'll say goodbye right now. For Jack Day, I'm Aj Mansour. This is the State of Purple podcast. Excuse me, the State of Purple podcast. This is our initial reactions. We'll get back with our long-time reactions and then our preview for next week's game later this week. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us in this chat, and we'll talk to you later on the next episode of the State of Purple podcast.
10 seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop. Steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side.